Yeah, okay. My mic is on. Everything is on. All right. I ain't got to hit nothing. Okay. So I guess we can go ahead and start. So of course, we are going to discuss and review the course chapter 3. On behalf of myself is Kawan, Caitlin, Jayana, and Aaliyah. I feel like one of the biggest takeaways from chapter 3 is how important clear learning targets really are. When students understand exactly what they're learning and why it matters, everything changes from engagement to assessment results. The chapter really pushed the idea that learning targets shouldn't just live in lesson plans or standard documents, but should be visible, understandable, and actively used by students. Clear learning targets help align instruction, assessment, and feedback, making learning more intentional and meaningful for everyone involved. And just to hit on a couple like takeaways really quickly before we dive further in, learning targets help students know what success looks like. They connect instruction, assessment, and feedback. Students are more engaged when expectations are clear. Targets shouldn't be just be for teachers, but they're also for students as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I had objective one, and objective one says explain the necessity of clear targets to assessment quality. So like Kawan was saying, like students need to know what their targets are so they know what's being asked of them, and teachers need to know what their students are supposed to learn so that they can appropriately assess learning, appropriately lesson plan, making sure that, if it's a tested subject, that those standards are being met so that their students do well on those end of year assessments. Um, and so I thought it was really on the first page, it was really talking about like it's entirely possible to create assignments without having a clear understanding of what they're supposed to learn. And I feel like I, especially my first year teaching, was really guilty of that. Of like, okay, here's an assignment, and may it definitely related to something, but I didn't have a clear um picture of what they were actually supposed to prove that they knew. I just kind of had made an assignment, and so that was like definitely something for me, that as I've gone into a couple different years of teaching now, try to really make sure my assignments and those assessments kind of match what I really want students to learn. Um, and so in the diagram, it says, like, are the targets clear to us? And then are they clear to students? And what are they assessing? I really liked the picture of the target board, like a dartboard, and getting closer to the bullseye, meaning you're progressing in your mastery of the content or the learning target. I thought that was really a good visual of like students may start here, but we want to get them as close to full mastery as possible. Um, and what I thought about was a couple of teachers at my school use standards based grading, which I don't use yet, but I'm in the process of investigating for next school year, which is where they kind of just take learning targets, say there's 20 for 9 weeks based on their standards for their course. And students basically have infinite chances to prove mastery for those 20 targets. So they're not getting a 70 on an assignment, they basically get a 0 or a 100. And so they can retake those quizzes, retake those assessments to prove mastery of those whatever 20 targets there are, as many times as needed. But they really want them to master the content. And so I'm investigating doing that for my class. We have one teacher doing it this year. And then when I was in school, my math teacher did this to prove, she didn't want you just to move on to the next concept. She really wanted you to make sure you mastered each step. And so while it's more work on the teacher because you may have to grade something or create more assessments to make sure that students have mastered it, um, it's something that I'm looking at because I do think there's value in having students master the target versus be focused on a 70 is good enough for me or an 80 is good enough for me. It's like all or nothing. So yeah.
Really good.
I agree. That was objective to learning targets. by type. So in the book, there are 5 different types of learning targets that were identified, and they were first proposed by Stiggins and Coughlin. So the first one is knowledge, the second one is reasoning, the third one is skill, the fourth one is product, and the last one was disposition. So in the text, the authors try to understand that the learning targets often represent different types of learning. So reasoning learning, so knowledge is learning targets that represent factual subject matter content, procedural knowledge of how to execute a series of steps. Reasoning learning define thought processes students are to learn to execute the ability to use knowledge and understanding to figure things out. Performance skill level targets require the development of physical learning targets described learning targets in terms of artifacts, or which is the creation of a product that focuses on the learning target. And disposition level targets specify the development of attitudes, interests, and motivational intentions that support the learning success. So the clear learning targets guide instruction, assignments, and assessment. And oftentimes, when classifying learning targets according to type prior to instruction, they can lead to 3 benefits, which help with knowing how to structure the lesson plan, help with deconstructing content standard to determine which activities and assignments will lead most effectively to mastery of the target, guidance in selecting the assignment methods that will yield the most accurate achievement data. And as an educator, I feel that learning to classify learning targets will help when determining both your approach to instruction and the assessment method that will be used.
I think so too. And when I was looking at the different types of targets, I was like, okay, it would be good for me to like pick several of these so it's not just I'm constantly doing performance based or I'm constantly doing knowledge based, like have a mix of that. I think that would help like show mastery as a whole for students.
That's good.
So objective number 3 is deconstruct learning targets as needed. So sometimes some beginner teachers did not receive a curriculum guide that is unpacked into lesson level learning targets. So that is what they have to do before they begin teaching sometimes. So for example, I as a new teacher, I had to go into my curriculum and do this as I am the only teacher that teaches my content at my school. So the process to deconstruct the content standard contains 3 steps. So step 1 is to use your information about target types and determine if your content standard is based on reasoning, performance, etc. Step 2 is to identify any prerequisite knowledge. So depending on your target, whether it is knowledge or reasoning, there is prerequisites. So for example, there could be reasoning prerequisites or, for example, knowledge prerequisites. Then step 3 is to check for alignment through the results. So you're going to check to make sure all of your targets lead to mastery of content. So you want to make sure your learning targets meet the knowledge and grade level that you're teaching at. So that ends objective number 3.
That's good. And then I have objective number 4. Of course, one strategy from the chapter that really stood out to me is sharing learning targets in student-friendly language, and actually taking the time to unpack them and start at the start of the lesson. Instead of just posting standards on the board, the chapter emphasizes using language students can understand, like I can statements and explaining what the target means in real terms. I know for me in my classroom, although I do teach specifically CTE, there's like their standard, what the like expectations are and the objectives are, what they want them to learn. And then when we get evaluated, we have to actually have our I can statements and our objectives showing based on whatever content area we're currently teaching. When teachers do this, of course, students aren't guessing what the lesson is about. And then just to harp on that for me really quickly, I make it a thing for my students to actually see what the ICANNs are and the objectives are on a day to day based on what it is that we're doing currently. Um, they know the goal up front and can track their own progress throughout the class. Revisiting the learning target during the lesson or at the end helps students reflect on whether they are actually meeting the goal, which strengthens ownership and accountability or for learning. And then also, and for me, do y'all have to do like bell ringers or exit tickets or reflections, but you can kind of call them like whatever you want to call them for your and the curriculums that y'all teach?
They're not required, but some teachers do use them really frequently. I usually don't, but some of the lower grades use them almost every
Yeah.
class.
I use the we have to do your starters or bell ringers, and then I have exit reflections so that way I can actually see what it is that they grasp from what was learned on that particular day. Some takeaways from for the objective four: using I can statements instead of standard language, which of course helps better their understanding because they are kids or children. Explain the learning target and don't just post it. So now I give visual concepts, I teach it, and then I have them apply it. So that way I can kind of see what it is that they're engaging in and what it is that they understand or don't understand. Students should know what they're working toward. Revisit targets during and at the end of the lesson. And then also help students self assess their understanding. Those are like the big takeaways that I got based on the objective four and reading the context for chapter three.
Okay, so moving into the critical reflection section. So reflection number one. So the reflection question is, which ideas in this chapter did you find most useful and why? So one of those ideas for me was terminology. So different states and districts use a variety of expressions to relay their achievement expectations. So like, for example, learning goals or benchmarks or performance expectations, just to name a few of them. So it's important to know that all of these words really mean the same thing. It's about what we want students to be able to know how to do. Um, so as a new teacher, it can be overwhelming to hear your administration or your principal use terminology that you may not have ever heard of or understand. So I dealt with this my first year as a teacher, especially if you didn't go to school for like your undergrad, for, like education. But you'll learn with experience that a lot of those words mean the same thing. And then another idea that was useful was creating student-friendly targets. So basically, like we were talking about earlier, I can statements. So for example, I can adequately follow a recipe. So these are always great to make your student goals very simple and more effective for kids. So that's number one.
I think you're right
I
with
you
sorry
you're
with the
good. Go
like
ahead.
acronyms and things. Like when you first start teaching, you're like MTSS and
Mm-hmm.
SEL and we have SST at our school and like all of these acronyms that are common for education. But if you didn't go to school for teaching, like I didn't, like it's hard to like know exactly what the difference is between them. And so I think that that's like true for us, but then it's also true for our students. Like sometimes I catch myself using college terminology and I'm like, I need to go back and make sure that they actually know what I'm talking about and that they're not just sitting here like, well, what is the FAFSA or what is this or that? So that was really good.
And I can agree to that, especially with working in pre-K and teaching pre-K right now. Sometimes I feel like I'm having to like dummy down a lot of stuff for them to understand, but I know it's just a part of their development. process, and like they're not quite there to understand certain things, even when it's own content for them. Some of them still fall behind. So it's like that, catering it to each individual. But I had critical reflection too, which was, how does this chapter align with or challenge your own beliefs about teaching and learning? And I put that this chapter supported my beliefs, especially with that learning targets and content standards should provide guidance on how instruction should proceed. I feel like they should work together, and that how you choose to instruct or teach that specific content or standard should all be based off of what learning target you select. So not all units should be taught or done the same exact way, because your target for that time may very well require something different.
That was good. I have reflection question 3. Strategy I feel most confident implementing. Of course, the strategy I feel most confident implementing is clearly identifying the type of learning target before planning instruction and assessment. This is really important for me, given that I teach 3 different topics. And of course, I can't teach sixth, seventh, and eighth grade like they're all on the same level, because they will be like, well, what is that? What is no? I don't understand. Different things like that. Chapter 3 breaks down learning targets into categories like knowledge, reasoning, performance skills, products, and dispositions. That breakdown makes lesson planning more intentional and prevents mismatches between what's taught and how students are assessed. This strategy feels realistic and effective because it doesn't require changing everything, just being more intentional. When learning targets are clear and aligned, assessments feel fairer and feedback is more meaningful, and students better understand what they're being asked to do. This approach also supports a shift from focusing on grades to focusing on actual learning, which is something I strive for within inside of my classroom. And then just a few more takeaways. Identify the learning target type first. Prevents misalignment between instruction and assessment, and then makes planning more intentional, helps students understand expectations, and then shifts focus from grades to mastery. But that would be my reflection 3 and what I feel confident implementing within inside my classroom and based on my content area.
I just had a quick thing. So for your class, you have 3, I know you have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So do you teach 3 different, like, is it all one thing, or is it 3 separate, like, completely different topics?
So 3 completely different topics, but like my fellow colleagues, like they're blessed and lucky enough to actually teach like the same thing across the board, of course, at different levels. But like for 6th grade, for me, like it's nutrition and wellness. 7th grade is interior and apparel design, and then 8th grade is personal finance or financial literacy. I don't know, they're coming up with possibly changing the curriculum name again, but my other colleagues, like for example, you have computer science discoveries, but I'm not going to say all they learn, but just to say a part of what they learn on the same baseline is computer coding, right? But there's like different levels to it for them. As for me, it's literally like they even think like, also like when I come to 7th grade, like I'm gonna be cooking. I'll be like, no, so we're gonna get it all out in 6th grade, and then you're gonna progress and go for it from there. But it's definitely 3 for sure.
Gotcha.
I gotta say this too. I have that same experience. When I tell 7th graders, no, we don't do any cooking in this class, they're so upset. They are so upset. Like, and
Yeah, and it's
it's
like,
frustrating.
now what's interesting before, because what is this? I'm coming up on year 4. So before I actually started teaching with 8th grade, they were actually like a part of the curriculum content and everything. It was I want to say, I believe it was hospitality and personal finance. But they were even given like a budget, which that's no longer now, to where like they had to come up with a business name, And it was based off like a food truck, and you have to do like, say what type of food you would create or have, and then you would have to actually go, present that in front of the classroom and stuff like that. But now, of course, the curriculum is just strictly personal finance or financial literacy.
Elliot, do you teach all three as well?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Well, I had reflection question number 4, which was what part of this chapter makes you feel uncertain, nervous, or hesitant about applying in practice? And it doesn't necessarily make me like uncertain because I reading all this, like I know I need to do this, but having my class that's not like it's not made up, but it's specific to our school. They get credit for it, but it's like not a normal class. My like standards that the school has created for the curriculum are already kind of in relatively simple language. So like I really hadn't had to slash paid too much attention of diving into like breaking it down for students because it is really just helping them for their next steps. So when I'm looking at like all the stuff I'm going to do for EdTPA and certifying in English, like this is the first time I'm looking at kind of breaking down like state standards. And so that's kind of given me like I've been like really like diving into this class, and then the other class I'm taking is also looking at standards this week and next. So I think that that's important for me is to like know how to do that, but also to think about while my standards aren't written in complicated language with decimals and different steps, is still making sure that the students know what they're supposed to be doing. Because a lot of times, like I'm just helping them like make things happen and meet deadlines. And so I think that that's one of the reasons I've been considering moving to the standards-based grading is like that they know how to properly email their professor. Like that is a skill that I want them to have by the time they leave and graduate. So like making sure I can figure out a way to assess that properly, or that they know how to send their transcript. They know where to find the website. They know how to fill it out, all those things, and breaking those down into specific learning targets. Whereas like my standard maybe like could handle college level, responsibilities, kind of breaking those down further into those learning targets. And so I think that'll really help me moving forward. I also thought the little chart with like, is this a knowledge, reasoning, performance, or product was helpful for me. Like I said earlier about trying to vary my learning targets, especially like first semester and then like first part of second semester because I have a year long. Well, it's really 2 classes, but it's a year long class, and I don't do a lot of what I call like quote unquote real teaching, like where I make lesson plans and fun activities till about March because that's when a lot of our deadlines are done. And then I'm like, oh, now I'm a real teacher and I can make lessons. Like I do a dorm cooking project and residence life and kind of those fun things. But I want to like include these things earlier on in the semester so I feel like they really are assessing more instead of me just like being here to help guide them, which that's part of my job too. But I think that will be something that while I'm not like nervous about it, I guess I am uncertain as to like how to make that work for my class, but also how to make it work for EdTPA because it'll be kind of 2 separate things for me. So yeah.
I think that was good. And I think even now I can't say that I got that wonderful, great teaching. It's just kind of you live and learn. But I think that's good with how you're showing them like even real things that they can use in the real workforce on how to appropriately send out, an email, whether it's to your professor or to your boss or whatever the case might be. I think that's really, really good and really interesting. I wish I had that. So I hope your kids are taking heed to what it is that you're providing them.
All right. So we're gonna go to our conclusion, which is so to conclude this podcast chapter, we discussed our 4 objectives, which were Number one, explain the necessity of clear targets to assessment quality. Number two, classify learning targets by type. Number three, deconstruct learning targets as needed. And number four, select from options for sharing learning targets with students. So all of these objectives are very valuable when thinking about what what we are assessing students on. So it's important to begin with a clear picture on how to share with our students on what we expect from them as teachers. So it was great hearing everybody's perspectives and thoughts on this chapter, and that ends this podcast.
Awesome. It was good.